I'm Alan Robarge, a relationship coach, and you're watching One Reason Why. Let's talk about one reason why people obsess over an ex-partner. And let me define what I mean by obsess, the experience of obsessing, having obsessive mind. I am not talking about something that is voluntary. So this is very much an experience that is involuntary, that is taking over. It is a relentless preoccupation. So even if you wanted it to stop, even if you made an effort to distract yourself, even while you're in the middle of some distraction, there could be a low-level tugging at your mind, a low-level frustration, a low-level reminder of the ex-partner. And it could be generic. It could be simply the person's name or the essence, the thought of them. And as a placeholder to imagine that person, we'll pretend that person's name is Steve. And so there's this kind of like Steve. What is Steve doing? Steve, where is Steve? I wonder what Steve had for lunch. And sometimes it's very specific, as in a story. Other times it triggers a story because something you see or do, you see something on TV, you hear a song on the radio, and your mind immediately gets sucked into imagining what Steve is doing. Or if perhaps we, use the name Kathy, and it's Kathy, what's Kathy doing? Where is she right now? Who is she doing? Or it could be even less obvious or less concrete. So you don't actually have a story in your mind, but there's this constant anxiety, this constant urgency, this constant almost a life or death nagging feeling that you need to stay focused on this other person. The first time that I experienced this, it just so happens my father died in an accident. It was suddenly, and I was 14 years old. And after his death, meaning the day after, the couple days after, and it ended up going on for so many weeks, my mind would not stop thinking about, my mind could not integrate the reality of this loss. And there was this chronic, ongoing chatter. And for me, it was dad, dad's dead, dad's dead, dad died. So over the years or shortly after that experience, I don't necessarily think that I figured it out in that moment, but years later, when I really thought about that, I called it the death headache. I had this headache from this mind that would not rest. I could not integrate or make peace or get a break from the intensity of dad just died, dad died, etc., etc. So I use that as a reference point, what I'm calling the death headache, to also link to the experience of someone who's preoccupied with a partner. And again, it could be their name, it could just be something about them, but there's this ongoing sense of other. It is exhausting. And no matter what you do, you can wake up in the morning, and I usually I say, there's 2 seconds, 3 seconds when you wake up and your mind is clear and there's a little bit of a freshness. And by second number 4, second number 5, if you're lucky, you even get 10 seconds of waking up, and then it kicks in. Consciousness hits you, the awareness of your ex-partner, this loss, you are grieving, you are not in relationship, other, what are they doing? Just thinking, a constant reference point as if you turn on the music. Imagine you have this internal radio. The radio gets turned on, and it's loud, and it doesn't get turned off. It's this ongoing, constant distraction about the other person. Now, I have made some videos in the past referencing this experience as a trauma symptom. And this is the trauma symptom, which would be referred to as intrusion. And the preoccupied mind, the experience of your mind being so preoccupied, is also what's called hyperarousal. So in these other videos, I took a bit more of a clinical explanation to say, well, this is not really about the loss or the grief of this relationship, although that informs it. This is about a brain that has gone haywire, and your brain is stuck looping. And usually why we have a predisposition to, because not everybody has this. Some people are relationships end, some people are grieving, some people have what we're talking about, this in a mild form, but it usually can be contained, it usually has breaks, and it stops within a reasonable period of time. For someone who has an attachment injury that shows up as attachment trauma, and their brain is wired in such a way that the trauma symptoms get activated, and the activation has to do with a hyperarousal, a hypersensitivity, a hyper-alertness, and mix that with intrusion. And what intrusion means is that the mind does not have boundaries to this content, and it just keeps leaking in. Mike, Steve, Valerie, Barbara, whatever the name is of your partner, whatever the name of your ex-partner, or in the example of my father, dad. It just keeps intruding on my consciousness and on my experience. So from that perspective, we're talking about working with a trauma symptom, and we're saying that this is normal when we're making normal something that ultimately is out of balance. And I'm not a fan of the word abnormal, but in this moment it fits to say we're having a normal response to an abnormal brain function. So that when your brain is looping in trauma, we're saying, that's not usually normal brain function. And it can be a relief. It can be freeing just to know, to be able to name and go, oh my gosh, this is so, thank God I'm not crazy. This is not some form of mental illness. This is my brain gets stuck. I also refer to this as the broken record experience of it just keeps looping back around to the other person. Now that is an explanation in incorporating understanding trauma and trauma symptoms. Now I also want to add to this, and from a different perspective, say that one reason why the brain is looping and preoccupied with the other person is because that person represents love, validation, connection. And let's pretend you even had a not so wonderful relationship. Let's say you even consciously know the person you ended with is not very loving. So they're not the best partner for you. If you really look at it clearly, you can say, well, of course it makes sense that this relationship is ending. I don't need to continue on with someone who's not the best partner for me. But nonetheless, even though you know that this is not the best partner for you, your brain has coded and linked to the other person as the source of acceptance, validation, love, warmth. And it is this need, this great desire to have some kind of reunion, some kind of reconnecting with the other person, because the brain is perceiving that you are being deprived and going without love. And how profoundly scary is that? If you have an attachment injury from your past, if this was set up in your family where you were not fully seen, known, heard, or understood, where there was some form of being ignored, neglected, abandoned, or abused, or also being betrayed in some way, you know, your brain knows what it is like to go without absence. Or let me rephrase that. Your brain knows what it is like to experience absence and to go without connection. So when we have a person, even if they're not the best partner for us, who is the placeholder, who is the mind's image of potential to getting love and getting connection, and the relationship ends, our mind, having still under the influence of being wounded from the past, or our mind still not having been able to make peace from a history of being ignored and neglected or denied connection, the brain is going to use the current, recent object or the symbol, the placeholder. The person, the ex-partner, becomes the placeholder. Think of dreams. Think of how you dream. When you dream in symbols, you dream in images, and your dreams are telling you a story. And you know how there's something crazy happens in the dream, and I'm making it up in this moment, but let's pretend, a cow enters the room, and I start having a conversation with the cow. Or, I'm driving a car and I'm driving, through the ocean. These things do not make sense, but the brain is communicating to me through symbols and through images. So in many ways, this preoccupied, churning, constant reminder, this broken record quality of thinking of other, the other person. What happened? What is he doing right now? What is she doing right now? I'm longing for her, longing. This constant ongoing chatter usually means that your mind is taking the symbol and the image of the person, and it is linking to the realization that you are going without love and connection. So one reason why your brain is preoccupied with other person is because like decoding a dream, if you decode what the person represents, that reoccurring quality is letting you know, I don't have love, I don't have validation, I don't have validation, I don't have connection, I don't have acceptance, I don't have reassurance, I don't have warmth, I don't have someone there for me, I don't have someone there for me, etc. And it goes on and on and on. That it taps into a deeper, fundamental place that is unsatisfied, a fundamental place that is not at peace with regards to being alone in this world, with regards to being ignored in this world, with regards to not having a consistent level of reliable warmth, affection, nourishment, connection, emotional attunement, or we could even use the word love here. We don't have a consistent amount of love. So instead of the brain constantly saying, danger warning, I don't have enough love in my life, danger warning, I don't have enough love in my life, etc., 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 or I'm linking this to a history to say, danger warning, this is a reoccurring pattern where you don't have emotional connection. Danger warning, this is a reoccurring pattern. You don't have enough connection, emotional connection in your life. because the brain is not communicating to you, and in this sense, mind, we'll use the word mind, because mind is not being that direct with language, the mind summarizes all of that sense, that feeling, or summarizes that content into the image, the symbol of the other person. And that's why our brain keeps getting other, and again, you can substitute the person's name, Bill, or Susan, just keep thinking about Susan again. Oh, look, Susan's coming up again. Oh, I'm on the bus. I'm thinking of Susan. Oh, look, I'm going grocery shopping. Susan and I used to buy this kind of cereal. And it just keeps going on and on and on. And usually what's happening from a more, not from a understanding a brain science, neurophysiological trauma perspective, but more from a psychological perspective, is that underneath it, what's actually getting churned is our unsettled truth, our unsettled grief that we do not have emotional connection and nourishment in our life. And if you have an attachment injury, then chances are that there were perhaps gaps or holes or ways in which you went without emotional connection, warmth, attunement, harmony. And again, we can use the word love here. So I hope that this is helpful, at least to validate your experience of what it's like to have this death headache, the death of the relationship. And that in addition to framing this from a trauma perspective, we can also frame this from a needs perspective, a psychological needs perspective, and to realize that the placeholder, the symbol of the person that keeps coming up in the mind, it represents and points towards the deeper feelings of what is going unmet. Lastly, why is this important? Why do we want to know this? Because I can pull the projection off of the symbol and I can realize I need to focus on my unmet needs. I need to focus on the grief of my history of not feeling emotional connection and warmth to family and friends and partners. I need to realize that if I pull the projection off the person, that I'm not just stuck on Susan. It's not really about her or the other person. I pull the projection off of the symbol, and then I can work with it. I work with it by realizing this is tapping into a very profound grief of having a history and a life of feeling disconnected, not belonging, and not having enough emotional attunement. The goodness in that news, even though it is profoundly painful and the grief is profoundly difficult to work with, it does give you a choice. It does allow you to exhale and have a moment where you wake up and you can say, this is really not about the other person. This is about how I have a history of not having meaningful relationships, or I do not have relationships with people who offer a level of emotional engagement that I need to feel nourished in this world, to feel validated in this world, to feel affirmed, and to feel loved. So even though all of this content is very painful, it is a way to help us take a break from getting sucked into thinking or believing that we are obsessing about the other person. We're actually obsessing about the feeling underneath that's too painful to touch or is floating in our subconscious, and it's bubbling up in our conscious as the image or symbol or placeholder of the other person. But because it is so relentless, and because it's a broken record that goes on and on and on, and for some people this goes on for months, dare I even say, over a year. Some people, this intensity. Just the trauma mind gets activated and you're looping in it, and it is quite exhausting. So I do understand that it is incredibly sophisticated work and challenging to pull yourself off of the projection, or to pull the projection off of the symbol of the other person as a placeholder, because sometimes you're just so incredibly tired. You're so exhausted. It takes a wild amount of energy for the mind to continue to loop at this level of intensity. I hope that this was helpful. This is one reason why our mind continues to obsess